Hello, I'm Other Nick. We're going to talk about TLS. So TLS is the way to do secure communication over the internet, or it's one of the ways to do secure communication over the internet. It used to be called SSL, so if you hear someone talk about SSL, they're talking about pretty much the same thing. They changed it for no good reason. So when you see a green lock in your browser bar and you see HTTPS, like here, that just means that your browser is using TLS. So we're going to talk about what's happening when you see HTTPS on a web page, and I guess a little bit about how HTTPS uses TLS, and it's going to be a good time. So the story begins with these two characters, Alice and Bob, and they want to communicate over an insecure medium, the internet. The internet is a really hostile place. So let's say they want to share something with each other, but they don't want anyone else to be able to read it. They could just send it, but then you don't want anyone to come and snoop on your traffic and read all the things you're sending, right? Then he knows exactly what Alice is saying to Bob. So that's one problem. The other problem is if you're just sending something unimportant, then it's not a big deal. But if you send your bank password, then Snoop Dogg has your bank password, which you don't want that. There's also this problem, which is there's a lot of hardware between you and whoever you're communicating with. It's like a website. So you may not trust all of that hardware. Snoop Dogg could be a router somewhere that decides to change your traffic on the way. You don't want Snoop Dogg to think that you're saying drop it like it's hot when you really mean something else. This is called a man-in-the-middle attack when there's someone changing your traffic between. It's also sometimes called a dog-in-the-middle attack. All right, so so there's one solution to this problem, which is to encrypt the traffic using symmetric encryption. And symmetric encryption is basically you take your message and you jumble it up using a function called AES. So you take a key, it's like a password basically. You take your message and it turns it into this ciphertext that's safe to send in the clear. If Snoop Dogg sees the ciphertext, he has no idea what you're saying. And then Bob can take that same key and combine it with the ciphertext and get the original message. And so is that sort of clear? That's a way to send secret information across, and we can know on the other side if the information was changed. Yeah, what's up?
Even if the dog in the middle doesn't know what you're saying, could they still potentially change it so when it gets solved with a new key, it's gibberish or something?
Yes. So what you can also do, and what TLS does, is when you encrypt the information, you also have a piece of information that cannot easily be changed that can verify that it was encrypted with a valid key. So Bob will try to decrypt it and say, wait, this is nonsense. This is not encrypted with the original key. Does that make sense? Cool. There's one big problem here, which is that they have to have the same key. How do you send the key to Bob? Because then if you just send it, then Snoop Dogg gets the key. It's the same problem, right? So we have a really cool way for two people to communicate insecurely to share a secure key that only the two of them can know and that no one else can know. And it just uses math. So it uses a property of really big numbers that if you take a really big number and you raise it to the power of another really big number, you get that result, right? It's actually really difficult when the numbers are large enough to figure out what power the number was raised to get that result, if all you see is the result. So that's what we're going to use. So they start with this common number, G. They can just share that in the clear, like 17. Alice picks a secret number that she doesn't share, A, and Bob picks his own secret number. They don't have to be the same number. They're totally random. And then what Alice is going to do is raise G to the power of A and get a result. And Bob will do the same thing with his number. So they have these really giant numbers that are G raised to the power of their secret numbers, and that's called their public component. They can share that, and no one's going to be able to go from G to the A back to A. You can't figure out 3423 from that long string. So they can just send that over the internet, and even if someone intercepts it, they haven't shared any secret information. Then what we're going to do is Alice will raise the public information that Bob just sent to her private information, A. And Bob will do the same thing, and they'll get the same number because of algebra, right? G to the A to the B is the same as G to the B to the A. Is that sort of clear? Cool. So now we can just use that as our password. That's the password that that TLS uses to encrypt using AES. Okay, so now we're going to go into the actual network protocol. Alice wants to talk to Bob, so she's going to send a packet over that says, hey, I want to speak TLS with you. I want to use AES. And then Bob is going to say, all right, sounds good. I also want to speak TLS. Let's use AES. It's going to be awesome. And then he's going to send the public information that from the Diffie-Hellman key exchange, this piece right here, the G to the A. And he's going to send a certificate. We'll talk a little bit about that later. And Alice will share her information. Now they both do their Diffie-Hellman exchange, and they have a secret password that they can use to communicate. So then Alice is going to send a packet called the finished packet, which is a log of everything that's happened so far. So if anything spooky happens with this traffic, like if Snoop Dogg is trying to change stuff along the way, Bob will be able to know because the finished packet will contain different information than what he saw getting received from Alice. And then Bob is going to say the same thing. So now both clients are able to communicate securely. Everything they send after this is encrypted. And it's impossible for anyone between them to be able to read what it is that they're saying. And then finally, Alice can start communicating with Bob. Yeah?
So what happens if someone in the middle sends back a different quiet public key?
That's an excellent question. What if that were my next slide? So you may be wondering, what if Snoop Dogg is in between these two and just does all this with Alice, does the same thing with Bob, and he pretends to be Alice to Bob and pretends to be Bob to Alice, right? So far, there's actually no way to tell that that's happening, except for the server certificate that gets sent. So we have trusted third parties, these companies called certificate authorities, who are in the business of verifying that a particular website owns a public key. It's not the same public key used in the Diffie-Hellman key exchange, a different public key. And your computer comes pre-installed with a disturbing number of them. Any one of these companies can sign any certificate and say, whoever has this certificate can be bankofamerica.com or whatever. Just for fun, actually. So we have our green lock here. So I'm just connecting to bankofamerica.com, and let's check out the certificate. This is Bank of America certificate signed by VeriSign Class 3, blah, blah, blah. And we can see it says this certificate belongs to Bank of America, and this is the public key that This is the public key that I expect Bank of America to be using. And my computer says, okay, Bank of America says it's signed by VeriSign. Let me check in here. Yeah, sounds good. I have that root certificate authority. And so we can verify that this public key belongs to Bank of America. So then Bank of America is going to take this public key and cryptographically sign. Oh no. This public key here. So it takes the Diffie-Hellman key that we don't know belongs to Bob yet, and it signs it using the key from its certificate that we know belongs to Bank of America. So that's the connection that says that whoever we're Diffie-Hellmaning with right now has to be Bank of America, according to the CA. Are there any steps I should go over again? Is that clear? Yeah.
You may get to it in the other slide, but what about the intermediate certificate?
So the intermediate certificate is, it's the same idea, but basically, let's see here. So VeriSign doesn't directly sign BOFA. They have this extra certificate that they sign, and then that certificate signs Bank of America. So it's just another step in the chain, but this certificate is owned by VeriSign.
So does that mean anyone that was signed with the intermediate certificate will verify it as proper back with the root certificate as well?
Yes. You don't have this intermediate certificate on your laptop. You only have the root certificate. So if VeriSign decides to turn evil, they can sign a brand new intermediate certificate, and that has the authority to sign any website on your computer, and your computer will trust them.
Well, no, the problem is Symmetric in this chain.
Oh yeah, and ooh, interesting. Yeah, VeriSign is signed Symantec's intermediate CA. And Symantec is not a great CA historically.
Google is now distrusting Symantec.
Google is distrusting Symantec as a root CA. It's not distrusting VeriSign as a root CA.
But I believe that goes for anything signed by VeriSign.
What's up? Is that not the case?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Cool.
What's to stop somebody from doing a replay of the sign?
Doing a replay of the sign's public key?
Yeah, secret key sign.
I see. So you're saying, yeah, let's try that out. So I am Snoop Dogg. Alice says, client hello to me, does all this stuff. And then I communicate with Bob, right? I get Bob's public key for Diffie-Hellman and his certificate, and a signature saying that this public key does belong to Bob. And I forward that along to Alice. That public key has a private component, right? The B that Bob has that I don't have access to. So even if I send all the traffic along for Diffie-Hellman to happen, I don't actually have that shared password for AES because I don't have the private component from either person. So you can replay Diffie-Hellman signatures. So yeah, you can replay Diffie-Hellman signatures, but you can't get the actual encryption key. Cool. Anything else before we move along? All right, yeah. So those are CAs. So a little bit of history about this protocol. SSL was invented by Netscape way back in the day. The very first version was so good that they never released it. So they made the second version and released it, and it was garbage. So they made the third version and released it, which was much better and garbage. So in '97, Microsoft, right? Microsoft takes over the development and says, just as a nice axe to the head of Netscape, we're going to rename it TLS, just to confuse people, and release TLS 1.0. And that's what we used for a while, and then we have 1.1, 1.2. So 1.2 is right now the version that is used pretty much everywhere. 1.3 is a version in draft. And now we get to the part where I get to talk about my favorite thing about TLS, which is performance. 1.3 is all about making the whole thing faster. So here's our whole handshake again, right? The limiting factor when communicating with another server far away is not actually the total number of bytes you're sending to the server. It's sending something and then waiting for something back. Because I can send, I can drop, megabytes and megabytes onto an Ethernet cable and just wait for it to show up on the other side. But it takes me 50 milliseconds to send a packet to New York and have another packet come back to here. And when you have a lot of round trips like that, where you're waiting for something else to come back, that's where the delays happen when you're connecting to a website. So what TLS 1.2 does is it sends the client hello in one packet, and then all three of these next server components are all sent together at the same time. So you don't have to wait for the server hello to arrive before you send the server public key. All that shows up at the same time. Then, the client public key, blah, blah, blah. This all gets sent in this packet, this packet, this packet. So for a client to connect to a server in TLS 1.2, you need 2 round trips. You send this packet, you wait for this one to come back. Then you send another one, then you wait for another one to come back. And then you can finally send the actual message you wanted to do. And that's kind of a lot of overhead. So TLS 1.3 uses a fact of TLS 1.2 that's kind of cool, which is the reason we need to wait to send this packet is that there are a lot of flavors of AES. We end up, we have to ask the server to choose one of all the flavors of AES that we support before we can start talking to them. And is there a whiteboard here? Actually, I'll just use this. Basically, every time you end up using AES 256 GCM. I bet every browser in the last 24 hours, 99% of them have used exactly that cipher suite. So what TLS 1.2 says is, we're just going to assume that that's going to work. If the server, what's up?
1.2 or 1.3?
Sorry, TLS 1.3 says we're going to assume that we're going to use that exact cipher suite. And if it turns out that the server doesn't support it, then we'll backtrack and we'll figure it out later. So in the average case, in the average case, we send just the client hello and the client public key, and that's it. And then the server can send back server hello, server public key. Now the public keys have both been exchanged, right? So the server has its private stuff and the client public key. So it has the encryption key because it can combine them. And it sends a server certificate to sign the public key. And now it can send the finished packet. So in one round trip, we're already encrypted. And then the client sends back the finished along with the first few bytes of the actual data it wants to send. So TLS 1.3 has a single round trip to be able to open up a TLS connection. There's another optimization that existed in 1.2, which is a TLS connection. Being able to just continue to send encrypted information will only work while I'm still connected to the server, right? So let's say I connect to Bank of America, I close my laptop, I wait 20 minutes, and then I open it back up. If I try to refresh the page, it'll say, hey, I'm not connected to Bank of America. So it has to do that full handshake all over again, 2 round trips to be able to connect again. What it's going to do instead is take a shortcut. Whenever it first negotiates a TLS 1.2 session, it says, hey, we're going to use this encryption key associated with this ticket the next time we connect. So, what's up?
Does the client choose the session ticket in 1.2?
No.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, I probably should have had a diagram for how the session ticket gets generated, but the server sends the client in the first time I'm talking to it a session ticket and says, next time you're talking to me, use this session ticket, and then we'll just use the same encryption key we were using before. So all the client has to do is send, I want to speak TLS, and here's my session ticket from earlier, and then we have encryption again. It's just one round trip. So TLS 1.3 does kind of the same thing, but cooler and also worse, depending on who you ask. In no round trip time, you can immediately just connect and say, hey, I'm a client. By the way, here's my session ticket. By the way, here's the data encrypted with that session ticket right now. But we probably don't want to keep using that same encryption key for this whole conversation, so here's a new public key. So then the server sends back, OK, hello. Yeah, you're probably right. Here's another public key. And then a finished. And now the client has its private component and this new public key, and we generate a brand new AES encryption key. So all future information is encrypted in green here with this new key generated just for this session. This information is encrypted with the old encryption key from the last session. Was that your question? Yeah. Now you may be wondering, is it a problem that information is encrypted with an old encryption key that you used to have? And that depends on who you're asking. Probably, yeah. So if I have a server and I have its, how do I explain this? Yeah. So if I have a server and I find a way to get its private key 5 hours from now, then, and it's using this protocol, if I can get the private component of all that and I capture all the traffic that's happening right now, then I can use that private key to figure out what the encryption key is going to be. So then 5 hours from now, when this information gets sent, I should go back, sorry. So this piece of data is encrypted with an old encryption key that the server had access to. If the server is going to keep that key around for a long time, so if I capture that encryption key later, I don't want to be able to decrypt old traffic. I can decrypt new traffic that gets sent to the server, but you don't want to be able you don't want to be able to decrypt traffic that you've been capturing for days. Does that kind of make sense? Cool.
Maybe state it not as a double negative.
Yeah. What's up?
So you're capturing the traffic and then you grab the what's the timeline?
Ooh, that's not a
whiteboard.
whiteboard.
Timeline here.
There's no whiteboard markers. I was hoping there would be whiteboard stuff. So put another way, I talked to Bank of America today, and I send my bank password. Tomorrow, someone steals a Bank of America server out of a closet somewhere. Oh.
Nick can catch.
I don't trust myself to throw.
Thanks. This is not a Sharpie. Cool. All right, so
Nick, move right.
move right.
Good.
Am I good?
Yes.
Cool. So this is today, right? So Alice, Bob. Do a TLS session and send password. Tomorrow, break into Bob's house and steal his server. What's the day after tomorrow? Friday. I don't know. Send a cat photo. In this situation, what's up?
Your laptop died. You scrap it.
Oh, we'll figure it out. So if I've stolen Bob's server here, with forward secrecy, I can decrypt the cat photo, but I can't decrypt the password. Because every time we connect, we use a different encryption key. The private key is only used to verify that the Diffie-Hellman key exchange I'm doing really belongs to me. Without forward secrecy, I'm using the same private key every time, which means that the private key I use for the cat photo is the same private key I use for the password, which means that I can steal Bob's server here and figure out your password because I was also capturing your traffic yesterday. Is that like a better explanation of that? Cool. So that's forward secrecy. This version of session resumption does not and has never supported forward secrecy if you capture that private key. Well, yeah. In TLS 1.2, session resumption is not forward secret. In TLS 1.3, this part is not forward secret. This part is, because this is using a new key, this is using an old key. So that's why it's in blue. And that's why there's still some controversy about how secure the session resumption is in TLS 1.3. There's no round trip time, which is really cool, but we're compromising forward secrecy. All right. Oh, sorry, what's up?
Oh, so is it pretty much from 1.2 to 1.3 just as hard to get the key, but with 1.3 you can do more with the key?
Yeah. To get the key, you have to like hack the server in some other way. You can't get the key through the protocol.
Yeah, so it's still really hard to get the key as hard, but now you can just do more with it. Understanding it sounds like.
Now you can do less. It's less useful if you capture the key.
But with resumption, it's still not perfect forward secrecy.
Yes, it's still not perfect forward secrecy. Yeah. Which is kind of a weird compromise to have made. They're like, okay, some of your traffic is important, but the rest of it is way more important. So, yeah, it's kind of dumb. All right, so we're going to talk about Heartbleed. Heartbleed kind of fits into this talk because it was a bug in a piece of software that implements TLS. It's not actually a bug in the protocol, but it was a bug in OpenSSL in like 2013, where you can read arbitrary contents of the server's memory, just all of it. And what's in the server's memory is the encryption key. So you can read all the traffic as well. And you can read passwords that were written in the logs, everything. It was totally devastating. The gist of the bug was basically you tell the server to say something back to you, and you say, say cat back to me, and cat is 3 letters. And the server would say, okay, cat. And then you say, all right, say dog back to me, but dog is 100 letters. And it would say, okay, dog, but it would also spit out the next 100 letters of its memory and send that back to you. And you could use that to say, okay, send 10,000 letters back to me, and then you can just read all of its memory. So here's some more attacks that are actually against the protocol itself. Poodle was a big deal. Poodle is a downgrade attack, and it's also a padding oracle attack. So someone at Google figured out that you can use a padding oracle to exploit an SSL3 server to convince it to give you its key, or to compromise the security of the server. And people said, oh, who cares about SSL3 though? That's old. It's like 2008 or something. I guess it was like 2013 or something right now. Who uses SSL3 anyway? But everything in the world is backwards compatible. So what you do is you tell the server, or when you're a Snoop Dogg, you man in the middle the connection, and you say, hey, server, I only support SSL3. I don't support any of your fancy TLS stuff. And you tell Alice, I'm a server, but I only support SSL3. So Alice and the server both say, all right, I agree to just talk SSL3 to you. And then Snoop Dogg exploits that and then uses this padding oracle in SSL3 to be able to decrypt the connection. So that was exciting stuff. There's a whole class of bugs which are just about downgrading the protocol. The only mitigation for this is just don't let your servers support SSL3. Just tell it only to speak TLS. TLS 1.3 has a really cool mitigation for this. Let's say that tomorrow actually TLS 1.3 isn't really out yet, but let's say that TLS 1.3 comes out tomorrow, and then a year from now someone finds out that TLS 1.2 is actually really vulnerable, and that there's some other downgrade attack. We still want servers to be able to support 1.3 and 1.2 because people don't update their devices, right? Not everything can speak 1.3 yet. So what it's going to do instead is in that client hello and in that server hello, it has to come up with a random number as part of the protocol. So a TLS 1.3 server will create a random number where the first few bytes are not random. It's a magic set of bytes. It's like the first 8 bytes. And the client will do the same thing whenever they're downgrading from TLS 1.3 to TLS 1.2. So if Snoop Dogg is really between you, trying to convince you both to downgrade, the client will see those first 8 bytes and say, something is spooky, I'm not going to connect. So TLS 1.3 has effectively gotten rid of any downgrade attacks, which is really neat. Yeah.
How does that not get man in the middle? Because Snoop doesn't know that those values are special?
You can't. Snoop Dogg doesn't have the ability to change the random values.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, this is my favorite attack against TLS, and there's a couple attacks that exploit the compression. So Crime was an attack that exploits the fact that TLS, they were throwing a bunch of stuff in the protocol, and they're like, why don't we compress the traffic while it's going across as well, like when you zip a file? Yeah, sure, let's do that. So if you can control some of the information in a packet, but you don't know the rest of the packet, like a web page, for example. Let's say that I cause your computer to visit a web page, and I can control the refer header, like I control where it's getting redirected from. Then I can cause key equals ABC to be somewhere inside that web page. Let's say that somewhere else in the web page is like your secret key for the website or something like that, right? TLS doesn't hide how long the stuff is. It encrypts the data, but the encrypted data is about as long as the decrypted data. So you can figure out how long everything is going to be. And if you see that one key in your refer causes a different size from this other key, then we can infer that key equals DEF appears somewhere else in this page. You do that over and over and over again, and you can guess arbitrary contents of the rest of the page, which is like awesome. They fixed, so there was that inside the headers of HTTP, so they fixed it and said, all right, TLS just won't compress any of the headers. But then every website uses gzip on the uncompressed content. So when you request a web page, it's a bunch of HTML. The website, like Bank of America, compresses that HTML and then encrypts that and sends it to you. And so since the compression happens outside the algorithm, TLS has no control over how compressed the data is going to be. So the same bug is still in place. There is currently no mitigation of any kind. Actually, well, you can disable compression, which is worse.
Just for fun, actually.
Cool. Thanks.